I'm so happy to do. Abby and I have this all rehearsed.
So I just have a few topics that we'll discuss. We'll run through those, and then make sure we leave time for questions from the audience. So that sounds
fun.
Great. So now it's been 6 months since you left the Times.
Just say I was tired. I mean, we spend our lives supposedly truth-telling. Let's call it what it is.
So 6 months since you've retired, and now I know one of the things you've been doing is teaching at Harvard, and I know a lot of people here were very jealous, and they could not take your class when you announced you'd be doing that. So I think one thing they might like to hear about is kind of what that class has been like for you, and how you've enjoyed that so far.
Well, the class that I teach is in the English department at Harvard. It's a creative writing seminar called, amazingly, Introduction to Journalism. And I have 12 students, and one of the Neiman Fellows is also taking the course. So she's a mid-career journalist. And we do a lot of writing, and we read a lot of the, at least I think of them as being the great classics of journalism. We started out reading Jay Talese's totemic, wonderful profile, Frank Sinatra Has a Cold, and we focused on Snowfall for a class, which Michael just mentioned, and I'm really knocked out by what I just have spent today finishing grading their first long papers, which I think is a very ingenious assignment. It is, there are a dozen of them, and in the first class, we put the names in a hat, and everyone picks a name, and they actually write a long profile. They play Jay Talese, and they write a long profile of each other. And why I say ingenious, it's because that way I get to learn everything. So for a nosy journalist like me, it's a fantastic first assignment.
Definitely. So, I mean, something that, since you are teaching English, and I've kind of been noticing as I've been in college, is that there's kind of a decline in humanities majors, and especially English majors, that often a focus on pre-professional. Is that something that you've seen as well?
I get it. I mean, you have to be deaf, dumb, and blind at any of the major universities not to see it. At Harvard, the number of humanities majors have been going down, and in the English department too. And that's broadly true. A lot of people much more eloquent than I am have written fantastic things about this, including Roland Klinkenmuller, who used to be on the editorial board of the New York Times, wrote a famous piece in the review section maybe 2 years ago called The Decline and Fall of the English Major, and he was writing very regretfully about that. So I don't think it's that dire yet, but it's at Harvard, I think a couple of years ago, the most popular freshman course is Introduction to Computer Science. And before that, it was Ec10, the major sort of survey economics course, which is kind of a feeder to business and that kind of thing. So, at places like Columbia and Harvard and Yale, I don't think the problem is as acute as at smaller liberal arts colleges. A friend of mine teaches classics, he teaches Greek and Latin at a great college, and he is despairing, because the number of students have decreased. And the person who kind of got at the angst about this, I think, in the most interesting way was, you all know Jill Abramson, who writes in the New Yorker. She just wrote a great book about Wonder Woman that was recently published. she said that she was head of the history and literature department at Harvard for a while. She invited the concentrators over to her house for dinner. The people were considering a major in history and literature. She said there's one woman student who came to the party and that her mother was texting her daughter the whole time saying, "Leave now!" This is like going to be a ticket to disaster, like escape.
I think that is how some people view it, but I know you studied literature.
I did, yes. I studied British history and literature, and I think I taught at Yale for 5 years and Princeton for 1 semester, and I think the humanities are so fabulous and so important, and give you, a lifelong passion for books and thinking about all manner of things in a deep way, and they help you learn to write really fantastically, which I know you and your colleagues at the Spectator already do. But those are skills, thinking clearly and writing clearly are skills that everyone is going to need forever. So, up with England.
Yeah, well, it is very heartening to hear you say that. So I want to pivot to kind of talk about journalism. And as I was preparing to kind of do this interview, I was thinking back to your firing in May and kind of the extreme explosion of coverage around that. And since then, it seems like it's a shame that people focus so much, on that one day. And in lots of your interviews, they talk more about that than like the 11 years of your leadership at the time.
That's true.
So,
Them's the breaks.
So, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about your time at the Times before that, and your leadership as executive editor and managing editor. And I think, what people, I'm surprised that I don't hear more often people ask you kind of about those positions. For all of us that are kind of interested in going into journalism, the executive editor of the New York Times is the entire job in journalism. So could you maybe talk a little bit about what it's like to really have that job?
Sure. In terms of jobs that are sort of the sine qua non of journalism, I still think the most, noble title you can have is reporter, and I'll always feel that way. And even with all of the years I spent in editing jobs, I never stopped reporting, and I always continued to write, right up until the end. I wrote a cover story for our metropolitan section that I did a lot of reporting for. So I'm a huge believer in muscular news gathering and the value of having reporters out around the world witnessing and trying hard to get what I call the story behind the story. And someone who will be rolling his eyes hearing me talk about that is the gentleman sitting right in front of me, Edward Felsenthal, who worked with me in the Washington Bureau of the Wall Street Journal. And ad nauseum, I would tell reporters who work for me there or later at the Times, like that the story of breaking news and what happened, it can be thrilling when it's a big story, but the thing that always interests me is that story behind the story, the thing you have to dig for, the thing that it didn't happen in public and happened behind a curtain, that you really have to break some concrete to get. And that is basically the way I led the Times when I was Washington Bureau Chief, then managing editor, and then executive editor. I always wanted, I was never content if the front page didn't have like a distinctive story behind the story. And I pushed hard for those stories, and I guess my critics would say sometimes I pushed too hard, but I think an awful lot of other people there found that galvanizing and even on occasion inspirational.
Definitely. So when you were executive editor, did you feel like you kind of got to really be involved in a granular level in like reporting and in the journalism, or were you kind of doing lots of other, organizational wide things as well?
I did get to have time to still focus on the content of the journalism, which is my main love. But I would say really beginning around 2008, which was when the financial crisis was at its height, and advertising revenues, at least print revenues, started to really nosedive, that increasing amounts of my time were spent in meetings about the stresses on the business model. And that is still a very urgent issue. I was never resentful that I had to spend a lot of time focused on that, but it became, just a bigger part of the way I had to allocate my time.
Yeah. I mean, so you said that your most noble position is the reporter. Do you ever wish that you kind of stayed a reporter, or kind of stayed?
Yeah. I mean, not really. I mean, I really did love all of the editing jobs I had. And the first big editing job I had was when I was really young. I was at 29. Steve Brill, who started the American Lawyer magazine, bought a bunch of regional legal newspapers, including one in Washington called Legal Times. And he basically handed me that newspaper and said, move to Washington and go run this for me. So, early in my career, I knew I liked editing too. And throughout my career, I kind of shilly-shallied back and forth between mostly reporting or mostly editing. And, we were talking a little bit before we came out here with Rachel about gender and the role of gender, and so much has been written and argued about since I've been hired on that issue. But I feel the arc of my career very much coincides with big newsrooms actually wanting more women in senior editing positions. So I think basically I was mainly advantaged by being a woman. And I felt because there were always relatively few women bosses anywhere I worked, I felt like I have to go out and do this. I want to be a trailblazer.
Yeah. And I mean, looking at what you did to the Times, there are a lot more women in leadership roles now than certainly there used to be. And I mean, even now, kind of looking at other news organizations, how do you think that places are doing in terms of women?
It's not the year of the woman right now, that's for sure. I mean, think about it, the network, the most visible positions in journalism are not newspaper editors anymore. It's really, broadcast, whether you're on video or broadcast. And, there was, for whatever we think of them individually, there's Barbara Walters and Diane Sawyer and Katie Couric and Christiane Amanpour, and they're all now not the anchor or the lead person on their shows. And the network lineup is all white, mainly white guys right now. And they're really, I was very happy to see Susan Glasser ascend to be the executive editor of all of Politico, which is expanding internationally and has a magazine besides their daily site. But they're really Anne-Marie Lipinski, who was the editor of the Chicago Tribune, is now my Harvard colleague, but she's not running a newsroom anymore, and so not the year of the woman anymore.
Yeah. Would you say there's a difference between women in the broadcast industry right now and women in other types of news organizations? It seems like there might be more at the heads of either online news organizations or up higher up in those.
I don't know. I just don't think there are that many women running things, period.
Yeah.
Which to me, given that it's 2014, is really surprising. When I got out of Harvard in, this is going to sound like the Stone Age to many people, in 1976, I had been a stringer at Harvard for Times Boston Bureau, and the bureau chief at the time was a woman named Sandy Burton, who had clawed her way into that newsroom. She had started out as a secretary because that was the only way women were hired at Time. And she was one of the first, she was the second woman correspondent there and the first woman bureau chief. And she was a fantastic boss, and she took like an unusual interest in me. I was just a kid, but she made sure that I got good assignments and learned things. And I thought, wow, you know, the working world was going to be full of these like great dynamic women. And I never again worked for a woman.
That's a pretty, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I got to be a boss.
Yeah.
But there are other like fantastic women editors at the New York Times. I mean, you know, fabulous editors, the best I think in the profession, and you know they're in the leadership ranks of the Times, so that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, in terms of the biggest stories that you kind of oversaw as executive editor, one of those is, of course, the Snowden leaks. So
Yeah.
I did want to kind of take a minute to talk about that. And, I know that as executive editor, you kind of had to make lots of decisions around those stories, and I've heard you say in other interviews that when that was kind of first happening, you took a almost secret mission to the UK to talk to the Guardian. Can you tell us kind of what that was like first figuring out?
Sure. I mean, as managing editor of the Times, I've worked very closely with Alan Rusbridger, who is the editor of the Guardian, on the WikiLeaks material, and that had been a great collaboration. And you know, I think as most of you know, when Snowden first decided to become a whistleblower and hand over the millions of documents that he downloaded, he made a decision to go to Glenn Greenwald and Laura Quattress and Bart Gilman at the Washington Post. Alan subsequently told me that Snowden had decided he did not want to go to the New York Times because he was critical of the Times' decision back in 2005 to hold the original story by Jim Risen and Eric Lischblau about warrantless eavesdropping. And he thought the paper had been gutless to hold the story for that long. So he didn't want the Times to have a piece of this story. So that when, you know, the first big stories about the PRISM program and the chain of initial scoops came out, I mean, I was sick to my stomach because we were, you know, at the New York Times, we were the newspaper that won the Public Service Pulitzer Prize for publishing the Pentagon Papers. We had won another Pulitzer, by the way, for that 2005 story about NSA eavesdropping. So in my view, the important thing was that the Times published the story. But so I was just miserable. We'd been scooped. We didn't have any of these documents. And Alan Rusbridger called me up and said, you know, would you want to collaborate again? And the reason that he was reaching out to the Times is that, unlike the U.S., where we have, you know, fairly favorable laws protecting the press and freedom of expression, you know, in Britain the laws are much less good. And the government in Britain was threatening to either force him to return the Snowden documents or destroy them. And so he was looking for a very dependable guardian for this material, and soon he called me and said, hey, you know, I always remember this, a package will be arriving in your office. And a trusted courier, I don't want to say who it was, but someone we both knew well, like came with the Snowden material to my office, which I immediately sent for safekeeping to our legal department, which has a safe. Because, you know, an important issue whenever there is, I mean, the WikiLeaks leak and the Snowden material, when you compare it to the 47 volumes, the physical volumes of the Pentagon Papers, it's so much more material. And, you know, in both cases, the WikiLeaks material and the Snowden material contain things that if they shouldn't become public, and not everything has become public yet. Because there's a level of detail that can endanger lives and truly harm the national security. So how we would safeguard the material was important. But as part of the process, and in fact setting the ground rules for that, that was part of why I went to England. But the material was already in New York at the point I went to London.
Got it. And so throughout this whole ordeal, people have now talked, you know, about after Snowden and what that means for journalism. I mean, what do you see as like the very real, tangible effects of how it changes the way people report?
Well, I think it's a great question. I'm not sure even now I have a definitive answer for it, because we're still living through the after Snowden part. But I think the important thing is that in the period leading up to Snowden, you know, the Bush and Obama administrations have pursued a criminal leak investigation. So trying to identify the source of the leaks for a series of stories, some of which were New York Times stories that are based on classified national security information. The 8 cases are more than twice the number of these cases that have existed in all history before then. So Bush was very aggressive about national security leaks, and Obama, I think, to the surprise of many First Amendment lawyers even that I know well, has been even tougher than Bush and trying to keep the secrets and prevent the press from reporting classified information. So that atmosphere was already hardening against reporters before Snowden. After Snowden, I think, many journalists who deal with national security have become expert at encrypted communication, and I think an unfortunate after Snowden effect, and friends like Jim Risen, who I still am in contact with, tell me is that, you know, it's put a real freeze on the sources of the great reporters that try to inform the public about the war on terror and other classified programs that I was saying, telling you about Jill Abramson and flee her house, but like the way many sources who dealt with the national security reporters at the Times or the Post are they don't want your phone call. Like, don't be calling me. It's gotten harder and harder to do that kind of reporting, and I think it's the public that loses. It's not journalists who lose, it's the public who will be denied information that's really critical to them.
Yeah, definitely. So,
like, do any of us think that we are worse off for knowing the scope of the eavesdropping that the Snowden material revealed? I don't think so.
So moving from a national issue kind of to something that's really relevant to students directly on campus is one of the biggest issues that we try to report on here has been sexual assault on campus, and that's something that's not only relevant to Columbia but kind of everywhere. And you know, students have been very frustrated with kind of the information that the university chooses to release, and so as journalists, we've been trying to get information out there, but often because when dealing with kind of an institution of authority, which is I'm sure something that you all know, they're just very reluctant to release any information and very closed off. So I guess I was wondering if you could maybe share a time when you've been investigating a story and you just have kind of come up against
a stone wall.
Yeah, a brick wall like that.
I think, you know, the way, I'm just thinking of some of the really good, because there have been really fantastic stories on the subject of sexual abuse on campus. I mean, I was involved before I was fired in, you know, encouraging the work of Walt Plavanich, who's, you know, one of the best investigative reporters ever. He's been devoting most of this year to writing about this and did the amazing piece about the woman at Hobart, Hannah, who had been raped. And, you know, here at Columbia, you've gotten so much attention for the case, I'm sorry I forget her name, but of the woman who's been carrying a mattress. Yeah. And, you know, there's just an article on Friday about Princeton getting its knuckles wrapped for not having enough protections for victims of this. You know, in terms of how you pierce the secrecy of the administration and the people who are handling these cases, it's difficult, but having studied a number of big investigative stories about this, it seems like at least one way in is through the victims, and sometimes they're lawyers who, you know, have sometimes copies of the proceedings of the process and that kind of thing.
Definitely. Yeah, often it is the victims that have spoken out, and so.
But then you have to be careful because at Harvard, you know, there was recently, the most recent story on this subject was that a group of professors at the law school were actually protesting Harvard is in the process of having a new sexual abuse policy. And the law school professors were saying that the new policy doesn't have enough legal protection built in to protect the rights of the accused. So, you know, you have to make sure when you're reporting any case that you try to really dig into all sides, not to wind up with a story that's he said, she said, but to really make sure you know where the truth lies.
Yeah, and in stories like these that are really, you know, meaty and can often get quite long and into long-form reporting, something that people I think are always thinking about is how to really get people to pay attention to the stories, especially as, you know, everything is kind of being shared on social media, and a lot of our other speakers at this conference talked about like the importance of getting readers' attention and getting them to share things. How do you think that, like what kind of space do you still see for long-form stories like this?
Lots. Lots of space. And at the Times, you know, both as managing editor and executive editor, I was, you know, a champion of many very long stories, whether they were multimedia narratives like Snowfall, or, you know, another long piece of work that I championed was David Barbosa's pieces about the corruption of the political families in China, which is such difficult reporting and needs space to explain it and bring the characters to life. At the times, I mean, I only know from my own experience that, you know, when the Times has a long piece that's sort of singular journalism, as a story you won't find anywhere else that has impact, it finds an audience. It becomes often the most shared, most emailed, you know, big buzz on social media. The Times is getting even better at when it has something like that, making sure that social media becomes a part of the publishing process. I think that's smart. That's something that they've embraced a lot since I've been gone, and I think made a good start while I was there. But I think long form is both necessary and loved.
Got it. And I know that's really a big focus of your new startup. I think people would kill me if I didn't ask you about that.
Sure.
But, so, I mean, the startup so far, kind of what's been talked about with you and Steve Grill, is that it's going to be really these long pieces.
It's going to be just one. I mean, the thing that sort of surprises me, and I think of myself as being either a Pollyannish or naive person, but everyone seems like so shocked that we would only publish one long story a month and that we would dare to pay the reporters and writers of these stories a very decent advance on something that is between the length of a very long magazine piece and a book, probably, I'd say, averaging 20,000 words. I'm surprised that seems, you know, so Panglossian. That is the reaction I get, and all I can say is, like, wait and watch. I think that people recognize and value things of singular quality, and that we're not trying to build a whole website from scratch. We're not trying to make a whole magazine. We're two, I think, really great creative editors, and I have to say, I think we're both still hell of a reporters. And Steve won the National Magazine Award just last year for Bitter Pill, his incredible expose on, you know, hospital bills and whatnot. And so he and I are both going to write one of these babies, one of the months. We're each going to do one, and then we're going to edit the rest. And, you know, we're going to have a lean staff. We are going to, you know, be involved in multimedia presentation, not for everything, for stories where, you know, I am not a believer that video or motion graphics, like, is appropriate for every long story. They're great, like with Snowfall, when they actually deepen the story and become an organic part of the reading experience. But I think when they're just attached with extras, they fall flat. So that's the basic journalistic model for it, and we are talking to a lot of investors are interested in us and what we're doing. So
yeah, it sounds like an exciting venture.
I'm excited.
So do you want us to open up for questions? I think we should take a few questions from the audience.
Sure. You be the moderator.
Hi, Jill Abramson. I was wondering if you could talk about New York Times operation in China, and is it losing money? And the fact that you mentioned Patrick Dog and your weight horse.
I did, yeah.
So, like, what kind of danger or threat that this person has to deal with in order to stay a journalist? Because I tried to apply for a job at New York Times China and never got any callback or
That would never have happened when I was I'm just kidding. No. I mean, the consequence of publishing David Barbosa's first piece about the Wynn family is that the Times website was shut down immediately and remains shut. When I was in China in February, I could not access any New York Times journalism. And the Times had started a couple of months before the story was published a Chinese language website too, which was going gangbusters and attracting a lot, not only lots of readers, but lots of advertisers. And that was shut down as well. What is amazing is, and is a testament to like the thirst for quality news, is that even though it's officially shut through VPNs and other ways of getting around censorship, both the main website and the Chinese website, the readership has crept to me. China has a huge population, so it's not as big as the audience isn't as big as it would be if it wasn't officially censored. But the readership is pretty impressive for both, and I think the Times and especially Arthur Sulzberger Jr. deserve a ton of credit for sticking with it, for keeping the Chinese language website staffed. I went over there in February in part to make sure morale was good and talked to the Chinese journalists. It was so moving. They said to me so proudly, "We do not self-censor," because lots of other U.S. media organizations do self-censor. They won't dare to put up stories that are going to catch the censor's eyes. And I was very moved by that. And you asked about Patrick Zhou, and he is someone I met during that trip, and we just sort of established a rapport. We love a lot of the same writers, and he was actually detained by the police while I was in China, and he was questioned and even handcuffed. And his bravery just is astonishing to me. What he did the second he was unshackled is he came right back to work and started working on stories. He is a little bit nervous he cares a lot about his family, and he worries about repercussions. And before I used his name in the commencement speech I gave at Wake Forest, I of course checked with him because I was worried that I would cause him more danger. But he said, "No, please say my name. Please tell people what I do and how proud I am to work for the New York Times."
Is this working? I don't know if it's working. There we go. Is this okay? Yeah. I'm wondering, I remember, is this okay?
Now
Use it.
No, now
A little closer here.
put it closer to your
Put it
mouth.
closer to your mouth.
Is this okay? No, I just wanted to ask, when I was young, I think I may be a little bit older than you are. I remember on the roadsides, I would see signs saying, "Impeach Earl Warren." He was the Supreme Court Justice.
Oh, you don't have to.
You know who he is. Now, I know since then you've acquired a lot of knowledge about Clarence Thomas. Can you imagine a movement to impeach Clarence Thomas? I don't want you to say yes, whether it's right or wrong. Can you imagine such a thing?
Right now, the political climate would not suggest that, would there be an effort? I don't know, but would it bear any relationship to something that could realistically happen? No, I don't think so. I think, the Roberts Court, in some ways has not been as conservative as some people predicted, but a stalwart, predictable conservative vote is obviously always cast by Justice Thomas, usually with Justice Scalia. The two of them are like the ideological twins of the Supreme Court.
Yes.
But no, you certainly don't see roadside signs.
No, I know
I
you
think,
don't.
yeah,
Can you
closer,
imagine?
what I was just recalling is that, 1994, the off-year congressional elections were a Republican wave that reminds me a lot of the one we just had last Tuesday. And actually, there were some Democrats in the House who were making rumblings about, because that was still close to the time that Thomas had given his testimony in which they believed he had perjured himself. And they actually were talking publicly about trying to get an impeachment effort, but then Newt Gingrich was elected with the first Republican majority in forever, and all that talk died away. So, no, I don't think so.
Yet it seems to me that as things get more and more kind of democratized and dispersed, this may be an ideal grassroots movement having true impact on how power operates in this country. It seems like it's an ideal pressure point.
Who knows?
Yes, who knows? Agreed. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on the intersection and the relationship between the business side of publication and the journalistic side. I mean, obviously, some publications, notably Time, have decided to kind of get rid of the Chinese wall.
I think that's overstating it, but I catch your drift. I don't think they've gotten rid of it. I think it's become a more porous one, that there's more collaboration between the business and the news side. But
And what do you think about what the Times is doing? I mean, I feel like the Times, obviously, you do have Pinch kind of on top. He's ultimately makes all the decisions, but I feel like you also have some protections for the newsroom from the business side. Is that the case?
I can't really speak to current reality there, but I certainly felt strongly that the Chinese wall and the separation between news and business and the insulation of news judgments from business and advertising concerns had served the New York Times very well over the years. But in a digital world, which we all operate in now, like, where do you put technology and design and functions like that? They aren't clearly one or the other. And so it was very easy to delineate and have like a very strict Chinese wall when it was just the print newspaper, but not so in a digital age. And I really, again, this may sound Pollyannish to you, but through my entire career at the New York Times, never did I feel that a judgment I had to make about the news was pressured by business concerns, or never, ever did anyone on the business side say to me, you might lose an advertiser if you ran that story. It just never happened. It's not the ethos of the place.
Hi, Ms. Abramson. My name is Nathan McDermott. I'm a student at the journalism school across the street in Columbia. I know a few other people here are too. And in the past couple of years, there have been some successful internet media startups, like BuzzFeed, Politico, Huffington Post, as well as other nonprofit ones like Extra and exactly. And while more legacy companies like the Times and the Post have kind of struggled with the transition, and I was wondering, what your thoughts are on the future for legacy for-profit print companies in the new wave?
Well, it definitely, legacy print companies like the Times or the Washington Post or Time Magazine where you worked, it's really expensive to print. Newsprint costs are going up, trucks are expensive, all of that is expensive, and it has been a struggle to get digital advertising. Years ago, I think there was a hope that digital advertising was growing so rapidly that like the lines would somehow meet and that there would be enough of it to offset the declines in print advertising. That, as we all well know, didn't happen. But I think that the Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times and a few other what you call legacy print publications have succeeded in generating a very important second revenue stream with digital circulation income, and that's why the Times went to its digital subscription plan. And that the revenue that is yielded from digital-only subscribers is hardly insignificant at the time. They have about north of 800,000 digital-only subscribers. That's revenue that they wouldn't have otherwise. So, thank God, that decision was made. It was the right decision. But in order to, charge for news on the web, you have to have something of singular quality that is really worth paying for. And I think that's been the real struggle. The real struggle has been at regional newspapers and local newspapers that cut their newsrooms to ribbons in response to the deteriorating advertising climate, didn't have that many reporters left to do quality journalism, and now really can't charge for their content, so they're in a box. I think that's where the most acute stress is being felt.
Unfortunately, we are out of time, so thank you, Jill.